One of the things that was apparent to us is that we'd have a very diverse group of countries taking part in the symposium, and that would have significant implications for the ways in which career guidance policies were phrased and put together in countries, and for the types of programs that were delivered. Countries differ in the nature of their labour markets, their economies, their cultures, their traditions. And what we thought it would be interesting to do would be to have some material presented on what some of these differences are between the different types of countries that we have present with us here in Sydney for the meeting. And then to talk about the ways in which those national differences have an effect upon career development services and policies. How we're going to handle the session is through three 15-minute presentations, and what we thought it might be nice to do is to have a presentation that talks about the wealthier economies, the OECD economies, the developed economies, one on middle-level economies, and one presentation on a developing economy. We'll have three... Okay. We'll have three presentations, each of roughly 15 minutes. And I've, in addition, after those presentations, invited some of the members of the audience to talk about the context of their own countries. Paul Barker from New Zealand, either Lona or Annbjorg from Norway. They said they'd work it out, so I know that Norway always does work things out, so I'll find out at the appropriate moment which one of them will be saying something. Hilda from Botswana, and Gideon from India. But first I'd like to introduce the three panellists that we have with us this morning. We have Miho Taguma from the OECD. Miho is a citizen of Japan. She's a graduate in comparative culture from Tokyo's prestigious Sophia University. She has a Master's in Education from Boston University and a postgraduate diploma in intercultural education from the University of Paris. She currently works at the OECD's Directorate for Education, where she's working on a project on the assessment of prior learning. Before that, she was working in the OECD's Centre for Educational Research and Innovation on a project on e-learning, and prior to that, she was working at UNESCO. The second member of our panel is Helmut Zellot, who has a degree in philosophy, psychology, pedagogics and geography. And he's currently a country manager at the European Training Foundation, which, if you aren't aware, is an agency of the European Union. He coordinated the European Training Foundation's career guidance policy reviews in a number of regions. For example, the new member states of the European Union and the West Balkan countries, and he's currently in charge of a similar policy review in the Middle Eastern region, and he's also, in my view, the best project manager I've ever encountered in my life. Margriet is a South African citizen. She began her career as a social worker in Namibia. She has degrees in both social work and an honours degree in psychology, specialising in school counselling. She's had a long career as a career counsellor, including 12 years with the Department of Labour in South Africa. She's acquired along the way an MA in psychology from the University of Stellenbosch. She has moved into, I think very interestingly, work in career management in South Africa, initially with the South African Police Service, and currently she is working in the South African Department of Defence, where she's established a career development service for the civilian employees of the department. Each of our speakers will have 15 minutes, and I'll give them an indication 2 minutes before their time is up. But before they start speaking, I'd just like to give you very briefly about 4 or 5 slides which say something about, together, all of the countries that are in this room. There was, as a slight digression, I mean, you probably all remember that after September the 11th, 2001, there was what I think is quite a scurrilous campaign in a number of countries, including the United States, to denigrate the value of investments in intelligence agencies. I mean, after all, they said, what's the value of all of this money that's been spent on the CIA if we didn't even know that the planes were coming? Well, I'd like to say that I think the money that's been spent on the CIA is worthwhile, because in trying to put together just some brief charts to illustrate the differences between Bhutan and Luxembourg, for example, the only source, the OECD where I used to work, was completely useless. The only source that I could find, because it has nothing on Bhutan, nothing on Botswana, I mean, it's only the wealthy countries. So if you want to find out anything about all of the world's countries, the best source online is the CIA World Factbook. So all of these charts come from the CIA World Factbook. So George Bush, keep putting the money in, please. Don't take it off the web. Okay, let me see if we can get the first. Here we go. These are just some charts to very briefly show you the enormous differences that we have in the room between the range of countries. The first one is national wealth. And there you see a chart which shows the differences between all of the countries in the room in gross domestic product per capita in US dollars in 2003, ranging from about $3,000 in the case of India to about $62,000 per head in the case of Luxembourg. So you know who's paying for dinner tonight, and the Irish are going to be paying for the coffee afterwards. Second indicator of the enormous range of differences between the countries in the room is the proportion of the population that lives in urban areas. We think of Australia as being a wide open country, but in fact it's the most urbanised country in... Oops, Daisy, how do we get... There we go, back. I did a project on ICT in education, and I always make a mess of it. There we go, urban population. Thank you. We always think of Australia as being a wide open country, but it's the most urbanised country in the room, with about 92% of our population living in urban areas. But we have, on the other hand, a country like Bhutan, which has only 9% of its population living in cities. I mean, it's basically a rural country. Then we move on to the unemployment rate. And we find that we've got countries like New Zealand that really effectively have almost no problem, or Korea, sorry, the Korea's not here now. New Zealand has almost no problem with unemployment. In South Africa, the unemployment rate is about 25%. So a couple of these might overlap with some of Miho's slides, but if we look at some age differences, proportion of the population aged aged under 15 ranges from only 16% in Austria, 14% in Italy, to close to 40% in Botswana and Bhutan. And then we move on to, there we go, the last one, the population aged 65 and over. We look at the current age structure, we see that Italy has got 17% of its population at the moment aged 65 and over. In Oman, it's only 2%. Then we look what's going to happen in 10 years' time, or less than 10 years' time, at 2015, and we see that there are some countries, such as Italy, for example, where there will be a very, very rapid increase in the or Austria, in the proportion of the population that's elderly. In Oman, we'll only get a rise from 2% to 3%. So this is just designed to very briefly set the context and show some of the differences between our countries before I ask Miho to speak.
Thank you, Richard. And first of all, thank you for inviting OECD to speak at a very interesting and important meeting. And I would like to send the apologies from Patrick Vacan, who was originally invited and whom you have seen his name on the agenda, probably preliminary. So I wanted to convey his message as well. And I would like to congratulate the organizing committee and Richard to make the very difficult tasks possible to bring policymakers and researchers and practitioners to get together. And thank you very much for making OECD's work visible. Sometimes our work is not as practical as CIA probably, but we are doing our best for the moment. Okay, I would like to talk about how the national labor market and economies influences the demands on career development policies and the way in which such policies respond to the demands from OECD perspective. And let me see if I get it right. Here. Here? Yes. Yes, I did. Okay. Okay, with a limited time, I try to be punctual, but at least I would like to cover 4 things. One, demographic change, as Richard briefly mentioned, and the demographic change in the labor market, and economic development in developed countries in comparison with emerging economies and developing countries. And the importance of information and guidance in career development, which I will not go into detail because you are the practitioners and researchers and policymakers on the ground, so you know how important it is. And finally, I'd like to propose or just throw out a possible way forward, just an idea, and how OECD is directing from now on. So first, yes, the fact. Sorry. Yes, aging is a reality, as Richard said, in developed and emerging economies, not so much for developing countries, especially like sub-Saharan Africa. But the aging workers will support more and more, many more retirees. So there is a grasp of the projection from 1975 to 2025, and Richard pointed out the rapid change in Italy, but my country, original country, Japan, is worse actually. If you look at 2025, the median age of workers is 50, and whereas the retired people per 100 workers is 49 retired people per 100 people. So there are many differences among OECD countries. And now I would like to let us look closely at national level. Yes. The share of the age group of 25 to 64 among 0 to 65, it's in Australia. I'm sorry that the details are in French, but you can see that how the population, this group is increasing from 1970 at 50% to 81%. And I will go through many slides, but please do not be afraid. But I would like you to pay attention to the consistency of this pattern throughout many OECD countries. So this is Australia, this is Finland, this is France, this is Germany, Italy, Japan, Korea, Mexico, New Zealand, Norway, Spain, Sweden, UK, US, Greece. So overall, as you can see, this trend is very consistent in OECD countries. So as an average, 48% to 89% is of the age group of 25 to 64. That means this is the possible workforce. So now, how about the participation in the labor market of men? And again, I present a pattern in Australia. So as you, oops, sorry, this is Australia. Okay, so 1970 is presented by the line, black line, and 2000 is a red line. So as we can see, the age of entering the labor market is getting older, whereas the age of leaving the labor market is getting earlier. But according to the very recent OECD study, the age of leaving the labor market may become older. So we project that the line might be the age of entering will be even older, but the leaving will be older again. So this is our projection. But for the moment, the causes for entering in the labor market getting older is one, is the higher level of education. Instead of leaving high school and getting into the labor market, many OECD countries are now getting the level of tertiary education as an average. And another problem, according to OECD Education at a Glance, another publication, 2005, points to the fact that the growing population of the, it's called NEET, N-E-E-T, not in employment nor in education and training. So newly graduate cannot find a job. So this population is growing in many OECD countries. So these are some of the problems we have about the entering in the labor market. So once again, I would like you to concentrate on the pattern rather than the details, but this is quite similar to many countries. This is France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Korea, Mexico, New Zealand, Norway, Spain, Sweden, UK, US, Greece. So this is the pattern for male population in the labor market. How about the female? Well, so this is Australia. So there are some points to make. One is about the much more participation in the labor market compared to 1970 to 2000. You can see that the red line is much, the percentage is much bigger. And another interesting feature of the female participation, depending on countries, is the called M shape. Because when we give birth or get married, we leave the labor market. So we have a certain drop around the age of 25 to 30, depending on the country. And then some countries allow female to re-enter the labor market, and some countries don't. But some countries do not even have to leave the labor market. So there are different patterns even within the OECD countries, and you will see it. And also the similar pattern, and also similar pattern for, similar pattern with the male is that women also get higher level of education, so the entering age is quite getting older. Okay, here we go. This is Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Korea, no break at all, oops. So Mexico, New Zealand, Norway, Spain, Sweden, UK, US, Greece. So you can see how even among OECD countries, in terms of the female participation in the labor market, really varies. So there are many implications in the future, how to get women workforce participate in the labor market, especially in aging society. So overall, the size of the labor force will grow little or even fall in some G7 countries, and you can see the trend across the OECD countries. So this is the labor market situation. So the impact of aging on education or training is that, as we have seen, that there is less people, less young people. That means less skills coming from the youth. And the need for skilling and reskilling and upskilling of the adult population, both the older workers as well as the active working groups, and the need to give basic competencies or literacy to newcomers, because some countries turned to immigrants to support or maintain the economic growth. But in order to welcome immigrants, we need to offer the basic competencies in the first place. Oops. Sorry. Go back. Yes. And another point is there is evidence that increasing average level impact more on economic growth rather than only focusing on the highly skilled. So I will show you the evidence later. And finally, oops. Finally, and most importantly, we need to make all skills visible, either through qualification systems or credit systems or the points in any way, because as a policy tool to make all the possible labor force be involved in the labor market, including the NEET people I talked about, or the women who want to re-enter the labor market, or retired people, or the immigrants. So we need some mechanism or policy to make all the skills, competencies, knowledge visible in order to make it portable from one sector to another. Now, just the general background of the economic developments in developed countries. Richard already mentioned about GDP per capita. So now let us translate such figures into the world map. And the world looks quite different from our ordinary world map. Here we go. So this is a map in 2003, and the GDP per capita is illustrated by the color. Sorry, it's not colored, but it's black. So the highly economic countries such as Japan, US, Canada, Europe, South Africa, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand are colored in black. So those are the countries which have high GDP per capita. But when we compare the economic growth, we also look at the purchasing power of the people. So this is represented by the size of the country. Then we see, for example, my country, Japan, is quite small, but all of a sudden we become very fat and big. And Korea as well. And the US and Europe, the Western Europe mainly, is about the same size, so which makes it, that is maybe one of the reasons why European Union decided to become a one bloc, economic bloc. And we have a projection for 2020, and the world might look like this. So, one of the biggest difference is that if you look at China, before it was the shape. Please pay attention to the shape of China. It was not, it's big, but it was a little bit skinny, but it is becoming quite big. Yes, okay. So the implication of this is that developed countries are pressured by the emerging economies. So there are a lot of job loss to such countries, and we are losing job. And what would be the implications of such situation to the labor market? So implications is at the global level, there is increasing international inequity, and at the national level as well, there is domestic inequity. And there, two months ago, there was a study saying that the gap of the rich and the poor in China is actually bigger than that of the US. And that is very shocking, because in the US we know that there is Bill Gates on one hand, but on the other hand we have extreme poverty we witnessed by Katerina. So this gap is even bigger already in China. So the question is, the rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer, the Matthews effect. Are we allowing such effect? And if there is a role of career development and lifelong learning for all to bridge this gap, how can it be? So these are the questions for the future. And the importance of information and career guidance, as I said, I will not go into detail, but I just want to point to the fact that in addition to this famous book led by Richard, there are other activities also point to the importance of career development, such as adult learning thematic review and national qualification systems in promoting lifelong learning. And it's not an OECD activity, but International Adult Survey also points to the importance of the literacy level. And this is the literacy level of countries. And okay, thank you. Yes, this is, let me get everything. So let us compare US, Denmark, and Sweden. The US and Denmark, the mean is about the same, but the difference is the whole range of the low literacy people and the high. So this variation is very big. And in terms of Sweden, that the mean is higher and the highest even higher and than the US, but the bottom end is quite different. So the literacy level counts for economic development, and that is Canada. So if we have lower literacy level, which is level 1 and 2, if this population is increasing, then the GDP per capita is decreasing. So there is a correlation between literacy and GDP. And if the level is higher, 4 and 5, if this population is increasing, then the GDP capita is increasing. So there is a correlation between literacy level and the economic growth, and that is even evident for economic inequity and the literacy level if we put the coefficient of Gini. So very briefly, challenges and good practices for adult basic skills or literacy and the career guidance is that the lack of funding and the lack of continuity that everybody already mentioned by previous panels, and the two kinds of needs. One is to convince people who are not even aware that literacy counts, and also the second kind of need is to make such benefits visible. Once again, the evidence counts. We need to collect the evidence of the return of investment. And another type of challenge is the inappropriate outreach strategy. Sometimes we need to outreach this target population, but they are illiterate in the first place. But some government just keep publishing some brochure about the system, so we need to think about appropriate outreach strategy. And some of the good practices is to create one-stop service, which is very visible. If we go to this place, we all know that we get the information or the guidance, and sometimes it works well when it is integrated into a shop rather than setting up a certain information and guidance center, because people feel some affective barrier to get into such places. So using an ordinary place might work, and also instead of publishing a fabulous brochure, the words of mouth counts for such population. So we really need to examine the stakeholder behavior depending on the target group. And just very briefly, yes, a possible way forward And I was happy to hear that a lot of people already mentioned about the importance of recognition of non-formal, informal learning, or recognition of skills and competencies. And that is what we are trying to do, because we believe that that will be one of the tools to empower such groups: need people, women, working adults, retired people, and immigrants, not only highly skilled, but also low skilled. Thank you.
Maybe we could turn straight to Helmut.
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah. Thank you very much, Richard. First of all, for the invitation, and have to say it's a great pleasure to be here with you at this conference, and to learn with you, to learn from you, and also to share with you and discuss information. And secondly, please don't believe to everything what Richard said about me at his opening. And as regards the CIA, maybe we also should invite them the next time, if they have this kind of good information available worldwide, then yeah. And as Richard said, the European Training Foundation is an agency of the European Union, and we are working in specific areas for third countries, not for the member states of the European Union. That makes the difference. We are working in the context of the foreign aid policy of the European Union for three regions. The first region is the Mediterranean region. In this region, in 2006, we will do also a similar policy review on career guidance, but moreover even, we will support the establishment and setting up of a network of career guidance policymakers throughout the region. This concerns 10 countries, from Israel to Egypt, including Algeria, Palestine, and Jordan, for example. And we are planning to support this network, which includes 2 policymakers from the Ministry of Labor and from the Ministry of Education in all these countries, and we give them a sort of a capacity building during these years. And the second region we are working with are the former Soviet Union countries, from Russia to Ukraine to Kazakhstan. And the third region is the so-called Southeastern European region, and they are also called Western Balkans region. And before we were working, and in that context we came together with Richard and with John McCarthy and with a number of people that are also here at the conference. We were working for the so-called candidate countries of the European Union, which are now member states, such as Poland, our friends from Poland here represented, such as Czech Republic, such as Malta, and other countries. But with those countries we are not working anymore, and we entered also as institution 5 years ago, 4 years ago. Guidance came more pronounced on the policy agenda, due also to more stress of the European Union in its wider policies on this topic, and we started with this kind of review, which we are now extending to different regions. And what we learned was, just as a preliminary remark, that this kind of reviews helped a lot in further thinking, in further stimulating the policy making in these countries. Then let me start. And in my presentation, I'm focusing on one region. This is the so-called Southeast European region, or the Western Balkans region. And in particular, here are the countries Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia and Montenegro, and then also Kosovo. In fact, also Macedonia and Croatia belong to the wider area of this region, but they became very recently, last year, candidate countries of the European Union. So they have a little bit different status also in economic terms, and I'm mostly speaking about Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia and Montenegro and Kosovo. Because in this region we also did a review recently last year, and a number of people here in the conference also were involved in this and supported us, like Richard, like John, and also Tony. And first I want to give you a little bit of background information on this region, because I think it's necessary. It was said before, the population issues it's a bit different here in that region. The population is much younger. They also have to cope with some aging trends, but this is different than with the OECD countries. But most importantly, that all the countries face difficult transitions to market economies and democratic societies because they came from a command economy from the former Yugoslav. We can say it's the former Yugoslav republic plus Albania, which was a separate state, of course, always. But they had similar structures, a bit different to the former Eastern European countries, but command economy with more decentralized and self-management at enterprise level. It was a little bit different than in the former Eastern European countries. But what is also very important for the economy, for the labor market, and then at the end for career guidance or other kind of other educational and labor market services is that the region had, as you know, probably Serbia and Montenegro or Bosnia and Herzegovina, they had very recently wars, and this still affects heavily the economy. This is coupled also with ethnic conflicts. The growth is still very moderate. There is a lack of foreign direct investment because of the insecure investment climate, because of the political instability, social stability, which is now much more better and improving, but still there is a sort of backlog of these kind of issues. And foreign direct investment also has usually important impact on skills development because it's an important source for skills and also for knowledge transfer, and this lacks in the region. And at the same time, this doesn't boost the economy, then it's a missing factor. This has an impact on the public funds available because they became very reduced, and the social infrastructure is very weak, including health, including education, including labor market institutions. And the safety net is very weak. Poverty came up as a new phenomenon which didn't exist before. This is a little bit compensated, but not fully, by a significant donor support from major international donor organizations, not only the European Union. This is USAID, is very present there, Japanese bilateral support, a lot of different bilateral and international support is there, creating sometimes a little bit of confusion then also for policies, because every donor has a separate policy agenda behind, and this is not necessarily, if I look to the education sector for one or two countries, it provides also sometimes a bit confusion and different approaches within one system. And for a number of countries, the perspective of European integration is there in the wider future, in the next 10 years, for example. And now I would like to look a little bit closer to the labor market situation, and as the main question was here also by Richard, how does the labor market situation influence the demand of career guidance services, and or what are their connections? And therefore I would like to give you a brief overview of the labor market situation. As I said, the labor markets are currently undergoing radical changes, and the employment rates have fallen dramatically, and options have become less secure and transparent. That's a general feature throughout all these countries. There are extremely high unemployment rates, some peaks, for example, in Serbia, 30%, or Bosnia, even close to 40%. Youth unemployment, even much more higher. Youth unemployment between 50 and sometimes 70%. So can you imagine, extremely high. Nevertheless, we have to say that these are figures from the registered unemployment statistics, and they are not 100% sure. In that sense, it means that as the services are not so well developed there, people sometimes register in order to get health insurance or health coupons. And only a very small number of the people get unemployment benefits. It's 10% or even less, those who get the unemployment benefit. So they register for other reasons, or at the same time they work in the informal economy and register. So these are not cleaned data, but this shows in theory the caseload of those who are working in these services. And there is a huge informal sector. I think this is a very big difference. Of course, we have everywhere what we call gray economy or black economy or informal sector, more or less being the same. But here it is very huge. And here it is also as some sort of survival strategy, coping with the difficult transition phenomena, like, for instance, people lost their jobs, people lost also their income, and still the whole economy hasn't reached the levels of the 1980s in most of these countries then, yeah. So this means that people are forced also to go into the informal economy, or that they have multiple employment situations. At the same time, as you see, it's up to 40%, 50% even then, depending on the definition. But at the same time, the informal economy also has a negative impact. It slows down the process of transition, and it also, due to tax evasion, it doesn't help the development of the public sector. Then, yeah. And this is shown, as you see in the last one. It's a very high share of people still employed in agriculture. These are peak figures. For example, with Albania is an extreme example, but still Serbia 25% and so on. So a lot of transitions which have happened in other countries then, which are now, for example, like Poland or others, members of the European Union, these countries still have to undergo in that region. And just to summarize the labor market challenges, as I said before, job creation is for sure the major challenge. The second one, to attract more people to the formal sector, to the formal market, and then also to reallocate workers from non-productive to more productive jobs, but not to forget on the supply side, and this means the human capital or the skills capital. And here, interestingly, maybe also a little bit difference to OECD countries is that there are the gaps for soft skills or attitudes, yeah, are more pronounced than technical skills. This also is a sort of a transition phenomenon, I think, and poses also a different challenge, I think, for guidance then. And secondly, there's a huge gap. The largest gap exists at the provision of adult learning or adult training. And this lack of training, at the end, also when economic growth will come rapidly, maybe as it was said for other economies in your presentation, will put also a difficulty or a challenge then in that event then. The lack of training or the lack of skills, because Yugoslavia had a good skills base before, and this was mainly linked to industrial sector, for example, mechanical engineering, constructing or clothing industry. But these skills are not anymore relevant or updated to the needs of this changing and transforming economy. So, and at the same time, there is very little provision of adult learning and training, and this is currently a problem, but will be even more a problem when economic growth then will accelerate then. Some issues to be addressed, just to say, as I mentioned before, there are different lifestyles maybe also, or survival strategies, as we can call them, with multiple employment status. And there is a challenge in the area of mobility, because there is a lot of mobility between informal and formal employment, both mostly short-term. And we had statistics there that showed that, for example, in 1 year, I think in one country, was it Bosnia, it was almost 50% the turnover of workers from informal to formal and again back, for example, and always short-term. So a certain high mobility then, yeah, which also, having in mind guidance, for example, yeah, would put a totally different challenge then. Okay, sorry. And from unemployment to employment, and so on. Now, a little bit about career guidance provision. Just to sum up, it's emerging, but it's still rather weak. There is an absence of a wider strategy, and there is still the public employment services mostly deliver also for students, for example, but they are overburdened and they can't cope with the role. For example, to mention the case that in Serbia, the caseload of a counselor is 1 to 2,000. So you can imagine what it means, yeah? And it's still a traditional approach in delivery. There are a number of examples. I don't have the time now to go into that. But coming to the conclusions, there are large gaps between the needs and the provision. And low and middle income countries face much heavier restrictions and also different challenges. And there is therefore a need to establish different priorities and also different ways to address these challenges. And most importantly, probably, is to see it as an integrated element for wider education and labor market reform, and not to forget it, because very often it was a forgotten element in these reforms. And very often, or sometimes, we also faced the question, is guidance a luxury for those countries? And this might be the last provocative also question for the discussion. Is it a luxury? Does the software come before the hardware, if we consider all the context which I mentioned before? If you want to have further information about DTF and our work, then please visit our website, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks. Thanks very much. I think I'm going to be known as the technological failure of this meeting. Thank you very much, Helmut. Now, just before we started, Margriet said to me, look, is it okay if I play a short 2-minute video? And I said yes for two reasons. One is that I think it adds to the variety of the processes we use at this meeting. It's a short video on South Africa. But the other reason I said yes is that I'm really hoping that it contains South Africa's national anthem, which I think is one of the world's greatest. It's just fabulous. So we'll now move on to Margriet's presentation, and we'll begin with the video, and then she'll have 15 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you for this, because I think a picture tells more words, or say more than words. And the last person that I've pointed out to you is our Minister of Defence. And I think that it's typical of South Africa, you know, the way that we deal with, and when there's music, there's energy. Okay. My presentation will include more practical application on the way that I understand it. And you must also understand I'm not from a national department, I'm a Department of Public Service, or Department of Labour, or Department of Education. I'm with our Department of Defence. But I had to do a sort of an external survey before I have to write the departmental policy. So I just want to go to the next slide. Yeah. So what you will find in my scope that I will give you an overview of the external environment. There's obviously not time to do it in depth. And this is where I get got my strategic direction, and then I will share with you the way that I've interpreted and do it in practice. No, it's too far now. Okay, this is the one. Now, one of the things that's very prominent about us, that we are a very young democratic society. We had our first democratic elections in 1994, and the background of the picture is where the people were queuing to cast their vote. On your left-hand side, there's our coat of arms. And the motto is, it is written in a language called San or Khoi, and it means diversity. The history says to us that the Bushmen responsible for rock painting was the first inhabitants of South Africa. Now we're moving into a decade of democracy, and this is the way that we evaluate what's going on in our country. Okay, now this is sort of a glimpse of what's the pressing issues for government, what's on their agenda and that we have to look at. And some of the things have been said in the introduction. Our high employment rate, it is officially 27%, but if you include the despondent workers, those that don't bother anymore to look for work, it could be as high as 37%. A very high poverty rate of 40% below the poverty line, homelessness, and then we really have the problem with the age, which is giving up a negative population growth at this time. Crime is very high, especially the violent, is very violent. And corruption, although that's not the single most problem, it is working across, and that undermines the delivery of social services. And I just want to elaborate on the education and the literacy aspect. There you can see the statistics, how many were below 9 years of schooling. It's about, I think, 20% of the population. But of those are about 6.7% employed, and so low-level workers. Okay. Now, this is my situation where I work in the Department of Defense. If I have to analyze the population, and I'm talking about the civilian component in the Department of Defense, which I'm responsible for, and I want you to concentrate on this line. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but as you've seen in the previous slide, I had to deal with 48% of the civilian population on the lower levels in that positions. Now, what do I do with them? Because in my policies, I say it is accessible for the people, I must deliver a service. Now, one way to uplift them is adult basic education. Although that's a training responsibility, I am involved in that. When we do go to the units and we speak to the people and we listen to them, this is the career information that we do give to them. Although the training department asks how many of you want to go into training, then a zero return will come. So the the practitioners working in my environment, they will do the education, they will try to motivate these people. And then we will hand it over to the training environment so that they can receive that training. Now, then I just want to give you a glimpse of the adult basic education, but I've also mentioned the other, our different bands of education, and they all have now a life orientation curriculum that the Department of Education was responsible for. And I just want to show you an outline of the... Oh, that's too far. Okay. Why it's not? Okay, there it is. And you can see in the curriculum, they sort of mirror what is the social agenda of government. The age, the well-being, all these things are part of the curriculum. And then these last two titles are specifically applicable for career services or career development. Okay, now I've missed again. Okay, let us then look at the specific outcomes of this. And one thing that I'm very can appreciate is the fact that it is research work opportunities in the formal and the informal sector. And that's very realistic at this stage of their life. If we must remember that these people are 40 or 50 years old, they are sort of the end of their work life. So you can't offer them that much, but you can still give them something that they can do on their own. Okay, I just want to again go back to this. There's another initiative that we've started in the Department of Defense. We've titled Empowerment Program. Amongst all these low-level people, there are some of them with diplomas, some of them with degrees, but they never had the opportunity to exercise their potential. Now what we do, we've created a career program where we take them out of the situation, we expose them to another situation like administration office to answer the phone or the registry, and at the end of that period we do career development with them, take them through all those actions, and so that they can compete with other people applying for other posts. We have a system that you have to apply for a post. There's no automatic progression, but they don't have the means to compete successfully. So in this way, we try to empowerment, and we really have good successes with them. They've been employed. One of the strategic things that we've done, we've placed 2 of them in the ministry office, and they are now working there. Some of them continue at their BCom degrees at this stage. Now, what I'm... Okay, let us go to the next part and just give you an indication of our diversity. Officially, we recognize 4 different cultural groups, the blacks, the whites, the colored, and the Indians, although there are more than that. The implication in service delivery is that, and it has a direct effect on the way that I deliver my services, that this must be reflected in our workforce. At this moment, I have a 50% of vacancy rate in my environment because I'm not allowed to recruit any whites at this moment. It must be black. Then I have an internal problem that there's no money or budget to recruit from outside. So I've sort of exhausted the potential. I have white experienced people and I have black people on entry level. So I manage in the way that I use the whites now as a mentoring for the other people, but then the blacks is also there for the cultural thing in the sense that they can speak all the different languages of the people that we as whites are not that good with. Okay, and then I just want to give you an indication of the language variety that we do have. We in our constitutions, we acknowledge 11 official languages, and they also recognize 8 another unofficial languages. And I think it's next to India that we have the highest number of different languages. I think in India it's something like 25. So but we use English as a threat language. So most people, for English is their second languages. And that creates a problem that we can't deliver. The people are, according to the Constitution, they have the right to be served in their own language, but we cannot do that. So we have to negotiate the language issue all the time. Are you comfortable if we do it in English? Do you understand Afrikaans? Now sometimes they have resistance, but we really explain in the practical situation. Usually that's fine, that we can go on. We can use our language services, but they don't really have the capacity to do that. So I mentioned previously that I work in teams, so have the experienced white person with the skills because of the previous system, they have the skills, and then the black person to connect with them culturally, and that works very well, I must say. Okay, and then something that I must take cognizance of, that our vision for South Africa is the creation of an equal society, economically, socially, and all the between male, female, etc. So I think that's, oh, this thing is moving, okay. And one of the divides that I want to show economically, I'm from Gauteng, and you can see our GDP is 33.8% of the total of South Africa, while Mpumalanga, who's close to the Kruger National Park, if those who want to go, have been there or going to travel, it's something like 6.9%. And then you can also see in the other thing that Gauteng generates 9% of the African continent in terms of GDP, whilst the next door province has 27% of those aged 20 years or have never undergone any schooling. Okay, so this is the differences that we have to deal with. Okay, so public sector transformation is that I'm part of the public service, and the public service is the largest single employee in South Africa. It is regarded as a strategic partner in economic growth, and the way that they do is by service delivery, the so-called Batupele principles that we're talking about, meaning people first. And there is one of the constitutional values for public administration is recognized as HR management and career development practices that must be cultivated to maximize our human potential. So this is in our constitution that is important that we have human development. Okay. Then, but what happened with this principle? In 2000, there was a report by our Public Service Commission titled Career Management in the Public Service, and they recognize sort of career development aspects in that, but it is not practiced in the total public service. I think at that stage it was only 3 government departments who had some formal career management programs, which was police services, where I worked previously, and the Department of Defense, and then another department, but that's more career management, not really career development. And the reason why it exists in the police and Department of Defense is because they have registered psychologists working there, and they know something about career development. Okay, and so the current status is unknown, and the reason that they say is for those different things, because it is outdated organizational structures, decentralization, etc. And the policies need to be done. The current status, as I said, I don't know what's the situation. I asked them and I couldn't get that. So, and recently the Public Service Commission released the annual report, and there's the answer why it is not happening. The transformation, it provides for decentralization, but the people don't have the capacity. There's inappropriate capacity to use the delegation. It must still be developed. There's high vacancy rates, as I've illustrated in my own situation, and inadequate recruitment and selection processes. It can take sometimes up to a year to fill a post. Okay, so the framework that I have to work, we have lovely policies, and this is one of the things that's recognized with South Africa. We have first world policies, and the international world contributed to that, but the implementation thereof is a big problem. Then we have a Skills Development Act to improve the quality of life, the productivity, the self-employment, and the delivery of social services. Then there's also the Public Service Regulatory Framework, of which the white paper in human resource management is the one that's really guiding me. And just going to the next one, please. Thank you. I just want to say that they recognize it is with the employee, and this is where I sort of hack on my policy. It's not directly status, but that gives me the scope to do what I want to do. Okay, so the challenge, Kahidu is just a vendor word for meaning the challenge, that I had to do that. Now, I'm not going through this, it's not really time, but I just want to concentrate on, no, just please go on to the next one. another one, the personnel situation, something that I want to share with you, because I couldn't recruit qualified career counsellors or people with the right qualification. I was forced to take HR practitioners. And the reason why I wanted that, because I believe they had the career information, they understand the personnel services. So these are the people working with me, and I'm giving them in-service training in terms of career guidance. I have a little bit of assistance from external providers to give the training, and they are all studying now towards becoming more career practitioners and do the counselling side. Okay, we can just go on. And another very important thing, I work with partners. I think that was been said yesterday. I work with the manager, the employee organisation, and I regard what I'm doing in the process. Sometimes I have my career management hat on, and then I move into a career and development approach, and there's a good interaction between these type of ways that you can work. Okay, this we can skip because there's no time. This is a metaphor that I wanted to share with you, but we can go on. Thank you. The metaphor is just that the way that the spider is weaving its web, and the most fascinating thing is the way that it starts. It must have a belief that a breeze will come, so that that thread can be attached to that stick there. And I think this is what we're trying to do, the career management and the career development, making a link, and then you have your web and you have a policy that encaptures anything that you want to do. Okay, that's the end. Inkosi. Thank you. Danke.